The first time I heard it, I thought they were joking. We were at my mother's table in the dining room my father had rebuilt with his own hands after the flood, the long pine table that held every birthday I could remember. The chairs were still mismatched, one was a folding chair from the church basement that nobody ever replaced, and the candles were the cheap grocery store kind, 3 to a pack. None of that mattered. What mattered was that, on the night my younger sister blew out her candles, my father passed her a small gold key in a velvet box, and she screamed, and my mother cried happy tears, and my brother to be toasted her with sparkling cider from a bottle my father had been hiding in the garage for 2 weeks. "You've been approved," my mother said, leaning over to kiss my sister's cheek. "Downtown. 2 bedrooms. Walk up. Your father and I put the down payment down this morning." My sister laughed like someone had told her the funniest joke in the world. My brother clapped. My father looked proud in the way fathers look when they have built something for someone they love. And then my mother turned to me. I was 28 the year of that dinner. I had been working 2 jobs since I was 19. I had paid for my own schooling, every textbook, every lab fee, every pair of scrubs when I switched careers at 24. I had been paying rent on a studio apartment, with a radiator that clanged so loudly the neighbors learned my name. I had not asked my parents for a single dollar since I graduated. My mother smiled at me across the table, reached into her apron pocket, and slid an envelope across the pine. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she said. "We love you. You're old enough to buy your own house." There was no key in the envelope. There was a card. The card had a check inside it, and the check was for $200. I remember the number, because I stared at it for so long the candle smoke curled around my wrist. If you are watching this from anywhere in the world right now, and you have ever sat at a table and slowly understood that you were not on the same list as everyone else, hit the like button for me. I will tell you what I learned at that table, and how I learned it, and what it cost me to walk away. I did not sleep that night. I drove home to my studio with the radiator, locked the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and let myself be sick for the first time in years. Nothing dramatic. Just the slow afternoon nausea of being told plainly that you had been weighed. That you had been found wanting. That the love your parents had for you had a price, and you had not met it. I did not call anyone. I did not rage. I just sat there with the radiator clanging and the $200 check in my hand, and I made a list. At the top of the list, I wrote a single line: "Do not call them again until you have something they cannot buy you." I am going to walk you through what happened next, because what happened next is not a story of revenge. It is a story of patience, and of one quiet decision that turned into something I never expected it to become. It is also a story about a family that thought money was a way to love, and about the moment they found out it was not. For the first 3 years after that birthday dinner, I said nothing. I went to work. I did my job. I ran every extra shift I was offered. I learned to solder pipes from a YouTube channel out of Detroit, because the cheapest plumber in my city charged $400 just to show up at the door. I learned how to read a lease so well that I could tell you, on site, whether a landlord was trying to slip a clause that would let them keep your deposit. I learned how to fix a fridge by myself, how to repaint a wall so the roller marks disappeared, how to install a smart thermostat without electrocuting myself. I was not building skills to be impressive. I was building skills because I had realized, on that night, that if my parents were not going to build anything for me, I was going to have to build it for myself, and I was going to have to do it with my own hands. Through those 3 years, my sister posted the house on her social media. She posted the granite counters. She posted the corner fireplace. She posted a photo of herself sitting on the porch with the caption "Home." My brother was next, 2 birthdays later. He got the 3-bedroom with the walkout basement. My father held up the key the same way, the same proud tilt of the chin, and the family group chat, the one I had been quietly removed from a year earlier, exploded with confetti emojis, and the words "I love you, Dad." I was in bed, on the night of my brother's birthday, fixing a leaky toilet I had bought off a neighbor for $40. I did not feel angry. I felt something more useful. I felt clear. The fourth year is when the cracks started showing. I do not mean the cracks in my siblings' lives. I mean the cracks in the structure of what my parents had done. Those are not the same cracks, but they both matter, and you need to hear about both. My sister lost her job in the spring of that fourth year. She called me first, before my mother, because she had called my mother every week for 2 years and my mother had begun, very gently, to stop picking up. My sister did not cry on the phone. She was too proud for that. What she told me, instead, was that the mortgage had been adjusted, that the gift my parents had given her had come with strings they had never explained in the moment of the gold key, and that if she could just hold on for 2 more months, she could stay in the house. She asked if I could lend her $400 to bridge the gap. I asked her what the strings were. She was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. "They are the co-signers," she finally said. "If Mom and Dad can't cover a payment 1 month, the loan snaps back." The loan snaps back to me. I didn't know. They didn't tell me. They just signed the papers. I drove over to her house that weekend. It was beautiful. It was also badly insulated, badly painted, and twice as expensive to heat as the house I had built for myself, 3 rooms at a time, with salvage doors and a chest freezer I had bought off a moving sale group. I gave her the $400. I did not lecture her. I went home. My brother did not call. My brother's problems came in through a different door. He was 26, and the 3-bedroom was eating half his paycheck each month. He had begun to take cash jobs under the table. He had begun to charge small amounts to my mother's credit card, which my mother allowed because "your father and I want you to have a fresh start, baby." He had begun to ask my parents for money, and my parents had begun to give it. This was not new. This was the same pattern I had watched since we were children, only now the numbers had gotten bigger. When I was 7 and my brother was 5, my father had bought him a brand new bike. When I was 9, I was told to earn the bike myself by helping the neighbor rake leaves. I still remember rolling down the hill on that bike, the one I had earned, and how the handlebar was taped with electrical tape, because the second-hand seat I had been given had cracked on the first day. I learned to ride a bike on a borrowed saddle. I did not cry. I just learned. By the time I was 16, I had 3 part-time jobs. By the time I was 22, I had a degree and no debt. By the time I was 28, I was sitting at my mother's table watching $200 land in my lap like a consolation trophy. The cracks in my parents' structure were not about cruelty. I want to be careful here, because the easy read is that they were cruel, and cruelty is the simplest story to tell. The truth is more uncomfortable. They were unequipped. They had come from nothing. They had built the pine table with their own hands after the flood. They had cooked on a 2-burner camping stove for 6 months. They had, in their own way, married each other for survival, not for romance, and the survival math had become the only math they knew. They had learned that if you poured everything into one child at a time, that child could lift the family up. They had learned that if you spread yourself across all your children equally, no child would ever get high enough to clear the floor. So they had chosen. They had chosen my sister, and then my brother. And they had chosen to leave me, because I was the eldest, and according to the math they had been raised on, the eldest either made it or did not make it, and the family's job was to bet on the ones who had not yet proven themselves. That was the real reason behind the $200. I learned it, eventually, from a single piece of paper. One afternoon in the 5th year, my father called me. He sounded older than he had the year before. He asked if I could come by the house to help him with something heavy in the attic. I drove over because he was still my father. When I got there, the attic was not the only thing he needed help with. He needed my signature. He had a stack of papers on the kitchen counter. The top page was from a lawyer. The page underneath was a draft of his will. The third page was a deed for the Pine House property, the one in my sister's name, and a deed for the walkout basement, my brother's. He explained, very calmly, that he was adding my name to the deed of the family home, the one my mother still lived in, as a protective measure. He said he wanted to make sure my mother would always have a roof over her head, no matter what happened to either of them. I read the document. Something in my chest felt like an old bone clicking back into place. "Why now?" I asked. He did not answer for a long time. He sat down at the kitchen table, not the pine one, the smaller one near the window, and he rubbed his eyes, and then he did something I had never seen him do in my life. He apologized, with his whole body, the way a man apologizes only when he knows he has run out of words. "You were the strongest one," he said. "You were always the strongest one. We bet on your brother and we bet on your sister. We bet on you to bet on yourself. That was the math. That was always the math." He slid the deed toward me. It included a clause my mother had not known was in there. It transferred ownership of the family home to a trust. If anything happened to both of them, the trust would release the home to me, but only after I had agreed, on the record, to keep the home in the family for at least 10 years, and to use the proceeds of any sale to set up equal funds for my brother and my sister. I stared at the document. The math was the same math. Even in their apology, my parents were still solving for survival. They were still betting on me, the eldest, the strongest, the one who would always find a way to do the thing the others could not do. I signed. Not because I agreed with their logic. I signed because my mother would need a roof when my father eventually went, and because I had learned, by then, that a piece of paper signed in anger is just a piece of paper signed. I signed with a pen I borrowed from the kitchen drawer, and I watched my father fold the document into a square with his shaking hands, and I drove home in the quiet dark that smelled of pine. I did not know yet that the deed was the hinge of the whole story. I did not know yet that my father had planted a seed he thought would grow him an inheritance for the 2 children he had bought houses for. I did not know yet that the seed would grow something else entirely. By the end of the 5th year, I had built a small operation out of the skills I had taught myself. It started with a single job, a kitchen rehab, for an older woman on my block whose husband had recently died and whose adult son lived 3 states away. The woman's name was Mrs. Painter, and she had a fridge that ran constantly and a back door that no longer latched, and her son had wired her $300 to fix it, which was not enough for a contractor. So I had gone over with a used miter saw and a Saturday afternoon, and I had fixed the door and tidied up the kitchen and washed the windows from the inside, and she had cried at me in her hallway, and she had called her son and told him she had been blessed, and her son had called 2 of his friends in from the next county, and the next Saturday I had 2 jobs. I was not building an empire. I was building a network. By the 5th winter, I had a small crew of 3, Myra, a single mother of 2, who had learned plumbing from her father in Puerto Rico, Alla, a widowed grandmother from Mississippi, who could lay tile faster than any man I had ever met, and Bree, a 23-year-old who had aged out of foster care, and who had the steadiest hands I had ever seen on a paintbrush. We did good work. We did it cheaply. We saved people money. We saved people homes. We were, all 4 of us, women who had learned to fix something because no one else was going to fix it for us. The work was quietly successful. The kind of success that does not get a gold key at a birthday dinner. The kind of success that does not get a family group chat. The kind of success my mother had not been raised to recognize as anything at all. I want to pause here, because this is the part of the story where the niche of women, who were taught to bet on themselves, is going to feel something. If you have ever built something out of nothing and watched the family, who should have been proud of you, treat it like wallpaper, hit the like button. If you have ever been the eldest, the responsible one, the one whose competence was treated as a reason to withhold love, hit the like. I will see your click, and I will hold it. The 6th year was the year my father's stroke weakened his right hand enough that he could no longer sign the co-signer papers on my sister's mortgage. Her foreclosure notice arrived in the middle of June. She called me on a Tuesday. She was crying in the way that people cry when the last wall in the house has just gone quiet. She said the mortgage company had sent a final notice. She said her grace period was over. She said the bank was moving on the property in 90 days. She said she could not find another job. She said my mother was not answering. She did not ask me to fix it. She just told me. She just wanted me to know. I drove over to her house, the same way I had before. The kitchen counters were still granite. The corner fireplace was cold. The paint was peeling in places because, in the absence of money for upkeep, a person stops noticing. I sat with her on the porch. The chairs were different because she had been forced to sell the porch set just to keep up. She asked me what I was going to do. I told her I was going to make a list. This is the part of the story where most people expect me to do something dramatic. To write a check. To bail her out. To prove that I was the bigger person, the better daughter, the one who had risen above the family math. That is what I had been raised to do. That is what my father had been counting on when he handed me the deed to the family home. I did not do that. I did not do that because I had learned by then that the family math was the part of the family I had to leave behind. If I bailed her out, I was not just giving her money. I was validating the entire architecture. I was telling my parents that their bet had been correct. I was telling myself that I was still the eldest mule the family had saddled up to pull the cart. Instead, I made the call I had been avoiding for years. I called my father. He picked up on the second ring. He had a tremor in his voice that had not been there a year earlier. I told him what my sister had told me. I told him I was not going to fix it. I told him the family home was in the trust he had put in my name, and that he had a decision to make in the next 30 days. He could liquidate a portion of the trust, with my signature, and pay my sister's arrears. He could give her a clean start without the strings. Or he could let the bank foreclose and let her learn the math the rest of us had learned. There was a long silence. He said, "I didn't raise you to be cruel." I said, "No, Dad. You raised me to be used. I'm telling you I'm not going to be used anymore." He cried. I heard it on the other end of the line. I did not hang up. I let the phone rest against my ear the way I had let my sister's silence rest against my own ear years earlier, because sometimes the only dignity you can give a man who has wronged you is the dignity of letting him feel the weight of it in real time. He agreed to liquidate. By the end of that week, my sister had her arrears paid, with no co-signer line, no hidden strings. She cried in my mother's kitchen. My mother cried with her. My brother watched from the doorway, because he had been avoiding that conversation in his own life. He asked, quietly, if I would do the same for him. I said I would do the same for him on one condition, that he and my parents sign an agreement that the next time they were tempted to bet on a child, they would put their hands in their own pockets first. He agreed. My brother agreed. My mother did not agree, but she did recognize the equation, and for the first time in my life I saw her take a step back from the pine table and let someone else set the plates. I want to be careful about something. I do not want you to think I did this from a place of cruelty. I did this from a place of final clarity. I did it because I had been the eldest for 28 years, And in those years I had watched my parents learn to love my sister through the gold key, and my brother through the second gold key, and to love me through the absence of any key at all. And I had decided that night, when the $200 check landed in front of me, that if I was going to give my parents anything in the future, it was going to be a chance to love me as I actually was. Not as the eldest who would pull the cart. As the daughter who had already proven she could pull anything. I want you to also know that the path to that clarity was a long one, and a painful one, and that I did not always stand on it. There were nights in the second year, in the third year, when I dialed my mother's number, and let the line ring until she picked up, and then I pretended that I had the wrong number. There were nights when I sat in my studio with the radiator clanging and tried to write her a letter about what she had done, and the letter ran to 12 pages, and I burned it in the kitchen sink. There were nights when I did not see her for weeks at a time, and I did not feel relief when I did not see her. I felt something more like the slow grief of a person who has decided to bury the hope of being chosen and is learning to live beside the grave. That is the reason the question I am going to ask you at the end is going to matter. Because the question is not whether I was right or whether I was wrong. The question is what we owe the families that are unequipped to love us equally, and how we keep our dignity while we figure that out. The 7th year is when the family dinner happened. It was my mother's idea. She asked for everyone at the same pine table that had held my sister's gold key, that had held my brother's gold key, that had held my $200 check. She did not know what she was going to say. I think she just wanted to see, in person, that her children were still willing to sit. We came. My sister sat on the left, the seat she had always taken. My brother sat across from her. My mother sat at the head. My father sat small and quiet near the window this time, because his stroke had stolen his confidence. I sat at the seat that had always been mine, the one closest to the kitchen, the one with the folding chair from the church basement that nobody ever replaced. My mother had cooked the meal from scratch. She had set the table with cloth napkins, the kind I had not seen since childhood. She looked at each of us in turn and she said, "I need to say something." She said she had not realized, until the deed, until my father's stroke, until my sister's foreclosure, how much of the family she had been spending on the wrong children. She apologized to my sister for teaching her to expect rescue. She apologized to my brother for teaching him to confuse his parents' credit with his own ability. She apologized to me for teaching me that strength was a substitute for love. Then she said something I will never forget. She said, "I am sorry, baby, that we raised you like a tool." The dining room was quiet for a long moment. The candle on the table, the cheap grocery store kind, 3 to a pack, flickered. The folding chair under me gave its small, familiar creak. I did not yell. I did not cry. I had already done those things, years ago, alone, in a studio with a clanging radiator. I just said what I needed to say. "I am not going to disappear," I told her. "I am not going to cut you off. I am not going to pretend the math your family built didn't damage me. But I am not going to keep being the family's fallback. If you call me in an emergency, I will show up. If you need a hand, I will lend you one. I will not, however, continue to let you borrow my life, because you were too frightened to love us equally." My sister's eyes filled up. My brother nodded. My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand for the first time in a decade. My father said nothing. He just sat near the window, watching the candles, and for the first time I could remember, the candles in our family had been lit without anyone being told to pretend the love was more than it was. The 8th year brought more change than any of us had expected. I bought the house I had been saving for. It was a small bungalow on the east side of the city, 3 bedrooms, an attic that needed a new roof, and a basement with a sump pump that sang at midnight like a hymn. I bought it with my own money. I paid the deposit in cash from a savings account I had built across 7 years, and I signed the closing papers with a pen I had brought from home so nobody could tell me later whose pen it was. I did not tell my mother for a week. When I did tell her, she asked, with the kind of careful curiosity that mothers reserve for moments when they suspect they have been outgrown, "Are you going to invite us over?" I told her yes. The first dinner in my new house was not on the pine table. It was on a second-hand oak table I had bought from a young couple who had moved south for work, and the chairs around it were all the same height for the first time in my life. My mother sat in the chair nearest the kitchen. My sister sat beside her. My brother sat across from her. My father sat at the head, and for the first time in the family, the head of the table was not the loudest voice in the room. The head of the table was the most tired. We ate my sister's lasagna. We drank iced tea from mismatched glasses. The candle on the table was the cheap grocery store kind, 3 to a pack, because I refused to spend money on a candle to impress anyone. That night, my mother cried again. But the tears were for something different this time. She cried because she had spent the entire dinner in a house her daughter had paid for, in a chair her daughter had chosen, in a home her daughter had built out of nothing, and her daughter had not once asked her to be grateful. She had only asked her to be present. The 9th year was the year I finally understood what the family had actually been carrying. Not the gold keys. Not the deed. Not the trust. What they had been carrying was the slow terror of parents who had built the math to survive, and who had been unable, all those years, to imagine that the math could be wrong. My father had grown up in a house where he had been one of 7 children, and only one of the 7 had ever owned a home, and that one sibling had lifted the others out of rental by the simple act of owning a thing. So my father had decided, in the pine table kitchen over a heated conversation with my mother when I was 9, that the family would bet everything on the child most likely to lift the family up. He had been 15 when he had watched his eldest sister win a duplex in a card game, and her 4 siblings had moved into her basement, and they had eaten her food, and they had slept under her roof, and they had been safe for the first time in their lives. He had carried that memory like a coin in his pocket for 40 years. He had thought he was giving us our sister. He had not realized that he was giving us a math, and that the math would eventually eat the family alive. He told me this on a Sunday in October of the 9th year. We were sitting in his garage because that is where he went to be alone with his memories now, and he had asked me to come over to look at a toolbox he had inherited from his father, and the toolbox was just the doorway into the conversation he had been afraid to start. "Do you remember your Aunt Della?" he asked me. "The one who won the duplex." I did remember her. She had been a thin woman with red hands and a laugh like a porch swing. She had kept a wooden spoon inside her apron pocket, because she liked to tap people on the shoulder with it when they were starting to argue. "She lifted us out," he said. "I wanted to do that for you. I picked your sister first, and then your brother, and I thought you would lift yourself out, because that is what eldest children are supposed to do. I didn't know it would hurt you. I didn't know that the math was wrong. I knew your sister could be the duplex. I knew your brother could be the duplex. I thought you would be the one who built the duplex for yourself, and I thought that would be better. I thought it would be more dignified." He paused. He looked at his hands. "And I was wrong," he said. "And I have spent 9 years figuring out that dignity is not a substitute for love. I do not know how to say it cleanly. I do not know how to say it without my hands shaking. But I want you to know that I see what I did. I see it every day. And I am sorry." I did not hug him. I sat with him for an hour in the garage, and we opened the toolbox, and he showed me the chisels his own father had used to hand plain piano keys, and we said nothing that mattered. What mattered was that I sat with him, and that he let me sit. After a while, he asked if I would help him carry the toolbox inside. I said yes. That night, I drove home slowly. I passed the studio with the clanging radiator, which I had given up the year before. I passed the apartment block where my sister had lost her job. I passed the duplex that had been my Aunt Della's, which is now a laundromat, with a vending machine in front. I parked in the driveway of my bungalow, and I sat for a moment in the quiet dark that smelled of pine. And I want you to know something else. I want you to know that I did not, by the end of that evening, feel sorry for my father. I felt sorry with my father. There is a difference. Feeling sorry for someone keeps them on the other side of the glass. Feeling sorry with someone puts you in the same room with them. By the time I turned off the engine, I had decided that the family was going to be put in the same room with me from now on, and the room was going to be mine, and the chairs around the table were going to be the same height, and the candles were going to be cheap. The 10th year is the year of the small key. On my 38th birthday, my mother came to my door. She did not call first. She did not announce herself. She just showed up, in the blue coat she had worn for 15 winters, with her hair pinned up in the same twist she had worn at my sister's gold key birthday, and she had a small brown paper parcel under her arm. "Baby," she said, "I want to give you something." Inside the parcel was a key. Not a gold key on a velvet pillow. A small, brass-plated, hardware store key, the kind of key that comes in a paper envelope after you pay $4 to have it cut. It was a copy of the key to my own front door. "I called the hardware store on Hazel Street," she said. "The clerk at the counter made me sign a paper. He asked me what address the key was for. I told him it was my daughter's house, the one she paid for herself. He cut me a copy and he slid it across the counter in a paper envelope and he said, 'That'll be $4, and I paid him with the $4 I had kept folded in my wallet since the day I put the $200 check in your birthday card. I did not say anything for a long moment. "Why now?" I asked her. She said, "Because I owe you one key. And I do not want to ever let anyone else hold a copy of your key but me. I want my daughter to know that her mother has a key to her house. Not a deed. Not a mortgage line. Not a co-signer form. A key. The kind that opens a door and nothing else." I held the brown paper parcel for a long time. The key was warm because it had been in her coat pocket all morning. I want you to imagine that moment, because I have imagined it for a year now, and I promise you it is the kind of moment that changes the inside of a family if you let it. I did not fall into her arms. I asked her to come inside. I asked her to take her shoes off. I asked her to sit at my kitchen table, and I made her a cup of tea in a mug I had bought at the estate sale, and I sat across from her while she drank it, and we did not talk about the past for a long time. We talked about the new roof on the attic. We talked about whether she should freeze the leftover lasagna or put it back in the oven. We talked about whether my father was eating enough protein. We talked the way two adults talk when they have decided that the past is no longer in the room. Towards the end of the visit, she told me she had been carrying the brown paper parcel in her coat for 3 weeks. She had been afraid to give it to me. She had been afraid I would not open the door. I told her I had almost not opened the door. She laughed, the high, startled laugh of a woman who had been holding her breath since the night of the $200 check, and she wiped her eyes, and she said, "You opened it." That night, after she left, I sat on my porch in a chair I had bought at the estate sale, in a home I had paid for myself, with the key my mother had finally given me on the porch railing, and I thought about the pine table. I thought about how long the family had been sitting at that table, lighting cheap candles, pretending the love was even. I thought about the difference between a gold key and a coppered key, the difference being that the first one is rent, and the second one is grace. If you have ever been the eldest, the strongest, the one the family leans on, the one whose birthday came with a check for $200 while the others got deeds, I want you to know that I see you. If you are a parent watching this and you feel a knot in your stomach, I want you to sit with that knot. If you are one of the siblings in a story like mine, and you are wondering whether there is a way back to the people you wronged, I want you to know that there is. But only if you put your own hands in your own pockets first. And now I want to ask you something, because your answer is part of the story too. Was she wrong to stop being the family's fallback, or should she have paid the dues in silence to keep the peace? Tell me in the comments. Tell me what you would have done in her chair, with her key, at her table.